Hey everyone, Ulria here, and today we'll be looking at Queen Ansurek, the final boss in the Nerub'ar Palace on Mythic difficulty. Before we get into the guide, I want to say thank you to everyone who's watched the Nerub'ar videos. I sincerely hope they have helped some of you at least a tiny bit. I appreciate the feedback I've received so far, and hey, if you have anything extra regarding the style of the videos, the info I put in, I would love to hear it out, as this is my first tier making guides and I'd like to improve them going forward. Do you like the less edited and more explanatory style, or do you prefer the shorter type guides with highlights? Let me know. And while we're at it, maybe leave a cheeky like and subscribe. This is a 2 tanks, 4 healers and 14 DPS encounter, and it doesn't really require any specific classes, but having ones that can break roots for phase 1 and a decent chunk who can skip the ring in P3 will make your life a lot easier, although definitely not necessary. Before we look into how to deal with P1, we have to do some assignments. Viscerio's sheet has a neat part that lets you plan out your root breaks. As an example, I will use ours. A lot of the classes can break their own roots on every set. Druids can shapeshift, mages can blink, paladins can freedom, etc. Some however cannot break any at all, such as demon hunters and healer priests besides disc, which has the uppies, but as far as I know you don't want to play that talent. Those will require external freedoms, which is not actually a big deal as red paladins can spec into double freedom, and hunters can disengage their own roots and use cunning pet to break out someone else on every set. Important to note is that Gnome's ratio is a 1 minute CD root break. Shadow priests and rogues cannot break every root set unless they race change, then use escape artists on routes 1 and 3, and then disperse and cloak respectively. If your monks happen to be gnomes, they can do the same thing and have Tiger's Lust free for someone else or keep it as a backup. Do you mind that shamans can only break themselves out on every root set if they receive a times pyro? I will put a list of the root breaks per class in the description below. Now first things first, where do you start the boss and why do you start it there? Now you can see the bridge from Silken Court over here, and what you want to do is one line to the right. So this one is going to be your starting position, and this is where you're going to start for the first liquefy and for the first bait of the swirlies. Now why you want to do this is because one of the platforms for P2 is going to be here, the other one is going to be slightly off screen over there, and you're going to take up the first half of the room with P1. You're going to take up a bit of the second half of the room with the intermission webs, which places you right about in this position. You're going to end up intermission 1, and that's going to be sort of equal for both groups to get to their sides much easier. So you pull your boss, everyone is stacked on the brown line to bait the first swirlies, and boss does her first liquefy. Your tanks will be swapping, one taking the liquefy, the other one taking the feast. This will entirely depend on your composition you have. We had our Blood Decay take the liquefies and Brew take the feasts. You're now going into your root breaks. What I suggest is having a general plan of who goes where to avoid double stacking roots which can potentially kill people. It doesn't have to be pixel perfect positioning, but more of a everyone goes to the same spot every time. The first sequence of mechanics is pretty tight on timing. Right after the root breaks you're going to have web blades and you need to drop toxins almost simultaneously. You need to have a proper plan on how to deal with each web blade set. Of course they're random, but if people bait them in the same spots, you have a much easier time surviving. Web blades and waves will be your biggest death cause in P1. For all web blades besides the second and the fourth one, we bait them ahead and then dodge to the left towards the old goop to drop the toxins. Big mistake I see players making now when progging this is dodging to the right, and especially if you have too slow range targeted by toxins, they just won't make it back in time to drop it in the correct spots if they dodge right. For the first toxins we place one on the edge and one towards the middle and leave a gap in between which we will use for the second liquefy bait. Mind that the boss also spawns a decently large puddle under her, so the active tank wants to move her into the webs from the roots in order to not cover the ground you'll be moving towards next. You're gonna need 8 poppers in P1, 8 different people, because once you pop a toxin you cannot do it for a second time in the phase. And those people are gonna get a pretty big green debuff circle around them. They just want to move ahead forwards from the raid so they don't hit anyone. Now this is the second blades, and what you're gonna do with them is use them to move ahead. After that, have your range and melee stack in a camp to bait the next web blades because those have toxins with them. Now you see me do this kind of wrong here. I moved to the right, I should have moved to the left. However, you get the general idea. The next toxins, you just place them in a line. And for the boss positioning, you want to have her in between the first two toxins because those will be your melees there and you want uptime. The first person will always pop or around 1.5 seconds left of the cast, and then the second person and the third one is gonna pop as soon as your vulnerability debuff falls off. You're in the air for quite a long period of time, so don't be afraid. You have like 2 seconds of flight duration or something like that. And this overlap is really tricky. Use your defensives here, and this is kind of every man for himself. Don't try and bait the liquefy stacked, just go to a safe spot. If you have a puddle ahead of you, that's fine, you're just gonna fill the gap with the next roots coming. You're gonna do your roots, you're gonna break them, and this is the 5th web blade. Sorry, I think I said the 4th one before, but this is the 5th one you're gonna use to walk out again. After this is done, you want to drag the boss a bit ahead of where you're gonna place the toxins, and you're gonna go into your final sets and web blades as well. Now, you might ask why we have this whole space over here to the left kind of free. And this is because we proc P1 pre-nerfs and we will have webs from a root set that got removed. And we kind of use this line as an indicator of where to place the toxin, so we never really bothered changing it. And you have plenty of space anyway, so it didn't really matter. Now, a very curious thing about the toxins is if you got targeted by one, you cannot get targeted by another one for the whole P1. So if you already dropped a toxin, you know you're never gonna get one, and if you didn't drop a toxin, you might get one. So this can help you kind of pre-position, depending on whether you're dropping one, so you're closer to the line, or you can just move away. You bait the blades as you show ahead, and then just move back into the toxins, ready for the pops. When it comes to the intermission, you want to remember a couple of things. Show a class Rest, which will pull you to water. If you reach her, you will instantly die. Additionally, for P2 as well, you will leave a web under you, so your idea is to stick to the right and slowly rotate left. For the first Rest, you want to have your melees away, past the brown line, so they don't spawn their webs near her, as melees have a much more limited space. She will also periodically shoot out waves in sets of 3, which you need to dodge. The circles you see around players do ticking damage, and if you stack more than one, you just take more. However, they don't do that much, so don't be afraid to walk over people if you have to dodge a wave. Your aim is to break the shield as the third rest is happening, because you'll get a stacking dot that increases your damage taken by rest, which will just one-shot you on the third one. Plan a defensive for the second one. Oh, it also slows you by a decent amount, so play the wave safe. When you walk into phase 2, you want to have a solid plan of how to deal with it. What you see on screen right now is a spreadsheet I made for my guild for planning out our DPS CDs to ensure we kill all platforms fast enough. I have since made it into a template people could copy if they want to use it, and I have included the main CDs of each spec, cooldown timers, and so on. I'll put a link to it in the description below if you'd like to grab it. You have two sides, north and south, and multiple platforms which are fairly simple to heroic. But on the second one, both sides will differ on what adds they get there. Most of the adds share HP between both sides, however the shield guy on the second one does not, so you have to ensure both sides have enough damage to kill him before the cast goes off. How you assign the CDs will completely depend on your comp, and it is pretty fluid, but as a general rule of thumb, the best CDs to use on platform 1 are gonna be Boomies, Shadow Priest if spec'd into Dark Ascension, Sub-Rogues, and Destro Warlocks. Do you mind that you will need to give a Blessing of Autumn to your Destro if you want them to have it up for the platform, or alternatively they have to do some wonky stuff with Pre-Infernaling in order to have the CD back up. Warriors are also a decent candidate for first platform, but I would generally advise having them use on the second if you have multiple of the specs I listed before. Every other CD will be thrown on the second platform, and you do not want to commit anything to the third one. I would also highly suggest assigning everyone to a specific ad so you kill them equally fast. Based on that, you can assign what CDs you want for the intermission shield, but obviously don't go too hard on it, as you want to wait and break it as the third rest is happening. Don't be afraid to play around with your CDs and move stuff around to cover for spots you miss damage, or pull off stuff where you have too much. Even for platforms, you do not want to push them too early. We ended up moving our Shadow Priest and Sub-Rogue CDs to platform 2 instead of 1, because we also had a Destro and a Boomy who just took care of the first one. The new mechanic in this phase is the gateway you will have to go through to prevent it from blowing up. Both sides will have to send people through, and your aim is to do one on the main platform, which should always be 2 healers, and then 2 on the rest. This is also how you get Gloom Touch now. Every time you go through a gate, you will want to use a defensive because it really hurts. Move out of the way and get dispelled. Once that happens, you will get a debuff that will prevent you from going into another one for the next 30 seconds. You will need 7 pairs in total to cover for all the swaps. The rest here, similarly to Intermission, will also spawn webs under you when you get gripped. The main platform and the final one are pretty much the same. You will have to dodge orbs and kill the Void Speaker, who will attempt to cast a Shadow Blast on someone, which if not interrupted will one-shot the player. Set up a kick rotation for those. You can use the same macro from ovi'nax to mark them and give it to both tanks, as they will never swap sides. When it dies, in a couple of seconds it will launch everyone based on where its corpse is. The first platform is same on both sides. You'll have to deal with a tank mob and a beam mob. Nothing complicated here, but do mind that the beam can be baited by melees, so try and not angle one diagonally or you might screw some immobile range with no way to cancel the grip. Every time a beam goes off, swirlies will spawn under ranged. Your aim will be to have one rest per platform, and if you activate the bridge, you'll stop it if it hasn't finished casting, so plan out who will click the far and the close pillar. Platform 2 is where the fun begins. As I mentioned earlier, this one has differences between sides. The south one will be your range platform because it will consist of 1 beam and 1 tank mob, the shield guy, but also 2 acolytes which will only be reachable by ranged. You'll need to set up a kick rotation for them as well. What we did is we put our mages starting off on the north side and swap with 2 melees on the first platform so they end up where the acolytes are. The north side will have a beam mob, a tank mob and a shield guy, and melees thankfully can reach everything here. This is also the highest damage intake part of this phase, so plan your healer CDs to cover for it. On a side note, when transitioning to platform 2, you want to have someone zoom up ahead and activate one of the sides every time. This will determine which platform will have the first rest and just make the timings more consistent. We used a warrior who leaped ahead, but you can have something like a mage or a warlock gate. This also resets the gateway timers. Just be careful not to hit the spiders before the tanks pick up aggro, and use speed-ups like Roar and Windrush totems when going up. When you land on the platform for phase 3, the north group will have to move all the way towards where south group is, because that will be your starting position. This is where the boss will jump down, and it is where you will bait your first swirlies. We had our warlock set up a gateway for fast repositioning. Range should stack onto the outer edge next to the column, and the boss will be dragged to the one in front. One of your tanks will be targeted by Infest, which will spawn the little spiders, have them stand on the edge, and when they appear, put a ring of peace between them and the boss, keeping them in place while you nuke them down. Keep the boss close-ish for cleave damage, and if you see the ring fading and the ad still alive, throw some stuns and a vortex. You will repeat the same thing 3 times in the fight. Web blades, just like the ones from P1, will spawn throughout, but post-nerf the hard overlap was removed, so just watch your feet and try not to die to them. Right about now, your first set of acolytes will spawn. Have the tanks drag the boss to the first one, and as they keep dying, move to the one in front. During those, you will have 2 people targeted by portal drops. You will want to place them diagonally, one on the inner side and one on the outer side. Careful where you're facing your camera with those, as they will bump you forward, and if you're facing towards the outside, well, you will find yourself in a bit of a predicament. As the acolytes die, they will drop an essence directly in front of them. This is where the classes that can blink over the ring come into play. In a perfect world, you will have 10 of those. 3 on the first rotation and 7 on the second one, as the next acolyte spawn will have 4 ads, and the first 3 essences do not disappear. Monks, demon hunters, mages, warriors, rogues and warlocks all have a way of TPing or jumping over the rings safely. I'll put more info on how, probably in the description below. It is very likely that you will not have 10 of those however. So what I suggest is putting as many skippers as you can on the second rotation, and people who cannot skip on the first one. But the tricky part about this is that if you go through the portal with an essence, you will instantly start the detonation of the portals. So those people will need to go, give or take a second later than the raid group. If anyone spots a random essence that has not been picked up, you can hero play it by picking it up even if you get hit by the ring and die yourself. As long as the essence isn't on the ground as the zone passes through, it will not explode. Following the portal take, you will want to have a plan of who will spread where to avoid chaos, because the blue damage zone around you is pretty large on Mythic. Put a wind rush or use a roar and ensure that you don't clip other people while dodging the orbs from the exploded portals. When it comes to the locations of dropping the essences, you will want to place the first 3 close together in front of the blue group from the first portals, ready to be picked up, but also out of the way of the rotating group so no one accidentally picks up an essence, especially if they have already carried one, as that will instantly kill them. The final essences, the ones after the second ring, just place completely out of the way, as your plan will be not to interact with them and burn the boss before the third ring. One mistake I see guilds sometimes do is call to ignore the final small spiders and burn the boss. This entirely depends on boss HP percent of course, but I would advise you to nuke them down, send them to hell and then commit to the boss, because if those spiders reach it, then it's lights out. You do however ignore the final acolytes. If you want to reduce some of the damage intake of the raid, move the boss next to one of them so you passively cleave their shields and then free for all kick the casts. For the Royal Condemnations, or the Shackles, they have a drop-off damage element to them and are now 3 in total compared to the 2 in Heroic. You'd have the people go ahead of the group, put them close together next to an acolyte spawn location so everything can be cleaved down together. You would want to use something like AMZ on the Shackle group and a Link on the main group, and have the 3 people use defensives or call out for externals as they are in the biggest danger. For the final bit to this video, I'll give you some fun facts, tips and tricks that you can do on Ansurek. Starting off with the Lust, use it in P3 after you take the first portals. This will align well with CDs, 40 stacks of Spy Masters and help you get through the first set of Acolytes. Please do not Lust on pool, this does not make your fight easier. During proc, you can play with the Lust and move it as you progress. Start with lusting the Intermission shield, then platform 2, and then move it to where it should be used in P3. Paladins are very useful on this boss. Besides providing freedoms for root breaks, freedom also counts as the slow and Intermission. You can throw it on a slow class like Priest to help them out for the second half. Additionally, Blessing of Protection negates the Grip of Rest. Warriors can and should be spell reflecting the beam in phase 2, as it will do a decent chunk of damage onto the expeller. I've heard a lot of tank aggro issues on this boss. If your tanks are struggling with it and one keeps pulling aggro, remember that Queen Ansurek cannot go taunt immune, so spam away as much as you need. And that is all I have for the final boss of Nerub'ar Palace. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below or join my Discord where I will be happy to help you figure things out. Once again, all resources I use will be in the description, and thank you very much for watching my final guide of this tier. If you have any feedback for me, I'll be happy to hear it out. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, let me know. I'll see you guys next time, take care.